Okay, it's 7 o'clock. I'm going to call the Budget Review Committee to order. It's June 20th, 2022. We're in the Aldermanic Chamber and via Zoom. The meeting link can be found on the agenda or on the city's website. We'll start the meeting by taking a roll call attendance. If you are participating via Zoom and you're an alderman, please state your presence, reason for not attending the meeting in person, and whether there is anyone in the room with you during this meeting, which is required under the right to know law. I should have said members of the committee that are online. Okay, can we call the roll?
Alderman at Large Laurie Wilshire.
Here.
Alderman John Sullivan.
Here.
Alderman at Large Shoshana Kelly.
I'm here.
Alderman Ernest Jetty.
Here.
Alderman John Cathy is absent as now. Alderman at Large Michael O'Brien is present. Our chairman, Alderman Richard A. Dowd.
Present.
Mr. Chairman, also in attendance via Zoom is Alderman Derek Theobald, and also joining us in the chamber is Alderman Lopez. Also in attendance, Mr. Darth McKinney, Superintendent of the National Schools, Dan Donovan, Chief Operating Officer, who will be attending via Zoom, Jen Bishop, who is present in the chamber and also is president of the Board of Education, and Sean Smith, Director of Plant Operations, also in the chamber.
Okay. The first item on the agenda is roll call. Is there anyone that would like to not roll call, excuse me, public comment? Is there anybody in the audience or anybody on Zoom that would like to give public comment? Seeing no one, we'll move on. Communications?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, we have one from Mr. David I. Heath, Treasurer of Nashua Airport, and the reason is summary of financial position and operating results.
If there's no objection, I'll accept the communication and place it on file. By the way, everybody should take a look at that. They're in a good shape financially, so that's one of the reasons we didn't bring them in. Unfinished business?
There is none.
New business resolutions?
There is none.
New business ordinances?
There are none.
Table in committee, Alderman O'Brien.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to make a motion to remove from the table R-22-035, which is relative to the adoption of the fiscal year 2023 proposed budget for the City of Nashua, general, enterprise, special revenue, and grant funds.
Motion is to remove R-22-035 from the table. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. This evening, we're going to be reviewing the Education Department, 191, School Department. The revenue is on page 45 and 259 to 275, and the appropriations are on 206. Who's going to lead us off, Mr. Donovan or Mr. McKinney?
I have a presentation to share, Mr. Chairman, if that's okay.
Okay.
Good evening. Thanks for the opportunity to give an overview of the FY23 budget for the Nashua School District. Our budget development followed these three steps. DLT provided feedback in the budget development. That's the my direct reports at district office, the assistant superintendents, director of technology, director of HR, director of communications, and of course, Mr. Donovan. Then Mr. Donovan and myself and Derek Danielson finalized budget recommendations. And then we're presented this budget to the Board of Education, which was accepted and moved forward by the Board of Education. The main priorities for this budget are to maintain current staffing programs and resources, continue to expand special education staffing to meet the needs of diverse students, continue to add funding to address out-of-district tuition, support safety and security, and establish a district budget that we can build upon with state and federal funds and maintain grant compliance. But certainly with every budget and future opportunities, there's some challenges. So one challenge is meeting the ongoing needs of our students, which has been quite different since the pandemic happened. Investing in technology, investing in staffing to meet the needs of our kids. And I spoke about the funding piece, both from the state and the federal government. And now Mr. Donovan will speak to this slide.
Donovan?
Evening. This is sort of Nashua at a glance from the school side. We have at this point 18 schools, 12 elementary, 3 middle, all going through a significant upgrade renovation at this point. We have the 2 high schools, and it's listed here as one alternative school, but that alternative school is also a preschool, and that is the new facility at Franklin Street. We expect that building to be fully up and running come September of this year. There were some students on the 1st and 3rd floor for this current school year. Our number of students, as you can see, for the last 2 years has been pretty steady, about 10,100 or so. Total number of staff are 1,776, plus there's another 99 that are funded by grants. Our total number of teachers is 1,027. 955 are in the operating budget we'll be discussing tonight, and 72 are covered by grants. Each year, at the end of the school year, in the fall, when we have all the financial data, we put together the Department of Education report. In that report, there's a cost per student. The latest report that we did for last school year was $15,288. The previous year, it was $13,831, which is a number that's higher than you typically see an increase in 1 year. But that was because our costs, we did not drop our costs at all, actually increased, but the number of students had increased from the previous year. Our free and reduced lunch count we're still using the 41%, and that's from October of 2019. For the last couple of years, there's been free lunch for all students. So the paperwork that parents are required to fill out is not getting filled out because they don't need to do it to get the free lunch, since everyone's getting a free lunch. So we shall see what happens next year. At this point in time, we don't expect there to be free lunch for all, though there are just discussions taking place down in Washington. ELL students, we have 1,558. That's 15% of the population. And 20% of our population, or 202,093, are special education students. Those are both 1% higher than they were the previous year. Okay, this is a pie chart to sort of give everybody a quick look to show you sort of what are the costs of running a school district. As you can see, the 2 large numbers on the left side, you see the fiscal year 22, the year we're just wrapping up, compared to the 23 budget proposed for next school year. And you can see labor and benefits. In 22, that was 84%. That's going to 85% in the fiscal 23 proposed budget. So, I mean, it's basically a people-run business. I pulled out probably the top 4 then highest other amounts. Utilities, which is about 2% of our budget. Transportation, which is 5%. Tuition, what that means is that's the out-of-district tuition for certain special education students that we are unable to keep within the district for various reasons. And then the the special education pupil support services, those are mostly OT and PT type services for those students. And then all the other expenses to run the district is 4% of the budget. Okay, each year there is occasionally some confusion over what is the school budget, what is the operating budget. The Board of Education approves the operating budget without the benefits and the FICA and the pension. Those are then added by the city, since those are costs sort of paid and managed by the city. But they are costs associated with the school district. They're costs associated with our employees, therefore they get added to our budget. So for the fiscal year 22 base budget, counting the benefits, our number was $161,016,000. But just before we switch to the next slide, the increases that we're going to be talking about is based on the budget, the 116, the number prior to the increase in the benefits, FICA, and pension. So our overall budget increase this year is $5.4 million or 4.66%. You'll see later on this number is much higher than it has been in the last 5 or 6 years, percentage-wise and obviously dollar-wise. There was the mayor had put out some recommendations, and he suggested that based on what our budget was last year, that he would give us a 3% increase to our budget. And if the teacher contract was approved, that he would add another $2.3 million on there. So that total was actually 4.97%. So when we put our budget together, we didn't go looking to spend money in other areas. We simply said, what do we need? And 4.66 is what we needed. So that's what we put into our operating budget. Okay, so this budget does not have lots of new items. We're in a period now where we have the ESSER funding from the federal government. And the total amount that we have of that, which is going to be spread, we've spent a lot of it already. We still have more to spend, but that will be spent over about a 4 to 5 year period. So we've been able to use that money to fund new items and to help with certain other areas. So what I've tried to do when putting a budget together is just deal with things that are existing. What do we need to keep what we have? So on the labor side, what we added this year was the Brentwood School, which is the alternative school at Franklin Street. We added one more teacher there. We added a reading specialist at Fairgrounds Middle School, and that was to sort of even off the reading specialists. The other 2 middle schools have 2, and Fairgrounds only had 1. So this was a request that was put in last year. It didn't sort of make the cut, so to speak, but it is in this year's budgeted request. The Franklin Street School, this year we ran 2 of the 4 floors, and there was just 1 secretary there. It got a little tricky at times when that person either wasn't in or was running around the building. All of our other elementary schools or schools approximately that size have 2 secretaries, so we thought it made sense to add a secretary at that school. And with the increase in the size of the square footage, especially at Pennachuck, but also slightly at Fairgrounds, we added 1 more custodian to be used at the middle schools. So those are the only increases to our labor for in this budget. Okay, any other additional resources, non-labor type items? Audiologist contract, we got to the point where we needed this. This is for certain of our special education students. So we needed a contract with an outside person. We don't have that skill set within the district. There's a fiber upgrade that's going to be needed. Most of that money is an upgrade for the central office. This year we were down twice, one for over a 24-hour period. So we did a quick patch, but we would like to get that up and running so that the system doesn't come to a halt like it did this year. And we, working with the city, we put in the new budget software at the school. We use that software this year to produce our budget. The city is hopefully going to be doing that in next year's budget, so then we'll be all combined and we'll have a new product. That product is called Workday Adaptive. So the increase in our budget for that was $26,000. And the other thing we did, we have about 4 assistant principals at the elementary schools that we have half of their time in the operating budget and half of their time in grants. Their position over the years, when they were first hired, they were doing more curriculum work. Now they're pretty much doing the job of an assistant principal at the elementary schools. And so we decided, and I think it makes sense in the long run, to move those positions back into the operating budget. So we moved 2 of them this year back to the operating budget. The other 2 we'll probably put in next year's operating budget. So that's really there's not an increase, it's just moving them from a grant to the operating budget, and then we can use those funds in the grant as it was intended. And as I had mentioned earlier, this sort of gives you a sense of what our increases of the school budget have been. Now keep in mind, this percent is based on all the costs other than the benefits. And you can see that, we've basically been in the 2s or the 1s, and this school year, fiscal year 23, it's a 4.66% increase. And that is the end of our presentation, I believe, Dr. McKinney.
Thank you. Could you also make sure you send a copy of that presentation to Donna Graham? And since she's on vacation, would you copy me as well? Alderman O'Brien?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just committee house cleaning. I'd like to welcome Alderman John Cathy, who joined us at 7:05.
Okay. So, questions on the Board of Education budget? No, Alderwoman Kelly?
Thank you. You didn't go over the revenues, but I wanted to ask a question around the lunch sales. So that's I'm on page 259, 44503. I know you had mentioned that it was free for everyone, so I was just surprised to see that there was some actual revenue this year.
The revenue that you see in there that's the amount per lunch paid by the federal government.
Okay. So
for each lunch that a student takes and eats, whether they eat it or not, I guess isn't important, but if they take it, then we receive, I think it's about $2.90 or right around there. So that's what that revenue number is.
Okay, thank you. And the adopted budget, was that just what we had left over, the 1.9 from previous years?
Excuse me?
Your first line there says adopted budget was 1.935588. Is that what was previously left over from 2019 when people were paying? What?
Are you looking at the food service budget specifically?
No, I'm still in revenues, still the same page, 44503.
Yeah, that was the number at the time, yes. That was the revenue number at the time.
Okay, thank you.
All set. Any other questions? Alderman Alderman Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a few questions around state aid. Excuse me. I was reading in yesterday's Union Leader, the city of Manchester was able to reduce their school budget. Specifically, they pointed to House Bill 420, which said that they would bring in about 5.2 million into the city of Manchester for fiscal year 23. And I was curious also, in addition to that, so what state aid are we getting over and above fiscal year 23 that we didn't get in 22, if anything? And the second was also, they mentioned in this article that 1.15 million was cut from employees' benefits because the state will be covering the cost of these benefits for 1 year. And I was curious to know that, I know we had talked about the state giving back pension funds. Is that what that is? Because there's $6 million in pension that's going into the budget. And I was just curious. There's obviously some action going on in other cities. How does that affect us?
Well, I am not sure how Manchester, I'd have to check with Manchester to see where those numbers came from. We do get a payment each year from the state for the school. The adequacy aid is what they call it. And that number changes every 2 years as part of the state's budget. That number basically comes in, it's budgeted, in Nashua, it's budgeted as a revenue, as a school revenue, but the schools don't necessarily take that money and use it for anything. It offsets our operating expenses and therefore reduces the taxes needed. So I don't know what Manchester did. Maybe they used some of that to offset taxes directly if they received a larger amount in adequacy aid. I'd have to look at that.
Alderman Sullivan.
Follow up if I could, thank you. On that line item, 43549, state adequacy went up from 32 million to 41 million year over year. That's what I see, about little over 8 million from the state.
Yes, it did increase. It did increase. Now, keep in mind, the fiscal year 23 number is an estimate, but it's an estimate that we put in based upon information we received from the state.
All set, Alderman?
Yes, I am, thank you.
By the way, the pension monies that we're getting from the state, the governor did sign that in the last day or so. And that goes, basically we pay less, I believe, for our pensions for all the employees in the city. And so it's not a Board of Education thing, it's a citywide pensions.
Right, how will that factor in? I mean, if there's $6 million just for this budget, will that lower that cost because they are city employees, correct?
It will, the monies that we get from the state will lower what we owe the state for pension costs.
Right.
How it gets used, I don't think we're there yet because they just signed it.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman?
Alderman O'Brien?
Yeah, I think what you say is absolutely true, Mr. Chairman, that the governor just signed it today or yesterday?
Yesterday, yeah.
Yesterday. We have a budget that we have to get done by theoretically July 1st. And God only knows what happens in Concord. I've been up there 16 years and I could say that, okay? So you can't guarantee it, so we gotta come together with a budget at this particular time. Now, will the state come up with a check for the city of Nashua to the pension system? I doubt it. I think what will happen is our annual liability or our responsibility of payment into the state pension system will be lowered to what the cost. So there's a lot of math that yet has to be done with this particular thing. Now, citywide, when I was pushing this bill through for the city of Nashua, it could be $2 million, you know? So we're gonna have to decide, you know, exactly what, if that's what it's gonna be. But I have yet to see any real hard numbers yet.
All right. Other questions? Alderman Kathy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Could you walk me through the difference between ESSER funds and, I can forget all the different bills, the CARES monies, and then once you've made that, the difference, or explain the difference between those two, could you walk me through what specifically those monies are allowed to be used for and what they are not allowed to be used for, and how much of that we're getting?
Mr. Donovan?
Sure. CARES and ESSER, think of them as the same thing. There's 3 amounts of money that we received that total 47 million. They were given at 3 different times by the government. These are all federal funds sent to the state and then set up in the grant system in the state of New Hampshire. And then so they're managed by the state just like any other grant that we get. The first grant was called CARES, but it's ESSER/CARES. That was about 3.5 million. That has pretty much been spent. The next one is, we call it ESSER 2, and that's about 12 or 13 million, most of which we've planned to spend. We have not spent it all yet, but it is sort of allocated. And the remaining funds, 29 million or so, are what we call ESSER 3, or other people call it ARPA. So to try to keep things simple, I would call them ESSER 1, ESSER 2, ESSER 3, even though you'll hear CARES and you'll hear ARPA and you'll hear other words. They do all have official federal government names. The first 2 could be used. The first one was fairly strict about what it could be used for, and it had to be used for purposes to help students get educated in a time things that were related to COVID. So a lot of things were spent on technology, remote technology, Chromebooks, things like that, so our students could learn remotely. Also to filters for our schools to make the air cleaner. Things, basically, all that money was spent on items that allowed us to sort of run the schools without the students being in them. And then have them ready for when they came back. So we dealt with masks and a lot of those things. The second ESSER has a little bit more flexibility. What we've used a lot of that for is we continued with some of the computer areas, but we've also used a lot of that for additional staff to help us as these students come back. I think Dr. McKinney could speak better to a lot of the issues that we've seen with students coming back, being out of school for a year and a half. But we've used a lot of that to set up programs, and we've done some mental health things, and we've done a lot of things related to help the students prepare for to deal with this school year and then school years going forward. And then the final grant there's the programs that have worked. We will continue those on, and we will be using a significant portion of that, 15 million or so, towards renovations at 2 of our schools that really have old HVAC systems. So this is a way to use that. You can use that for renovations. It's a difficult process. There's a lot of paperwork, but you can do it. And we're also using ESSER 2 for the renovations we're doing this summer to the HVAC system at Franklin Street. So I do have a list which I could send over, which gives you more detail of what we actually spend it on. But what you can't do is take the money and say, okay, I'm going to put, let's say, 5 million towards paying teachers this year. And then it doesn't really do you any good anyway, because then the following year you turn around, you got to pay those teachers again. But they don't want you to supplant, so to speak, for payments for salaries, whether it be teachers or any other kind of staff. So it should be used for new things, for improvements to buildings and facilities and programs.
Alderman Kathy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate that, that explanation. That really helps me out. I know that you said that it cannot be used for salaries, and that's fine. I'd like to know how I can view this education budget and knowing about the federal funds and see how those funds are helping the budget, if that makes any sense. So what it sounds like I'm hearing is you had a school budget, you had federal funds to do tech or help kids come back to school. Had you not had federal funds, you would have ran over budget. Is that correct?
Well, if we would have not, excuse me. With the ESSER 1 funds, for example, if we had tried to go remotely and buy all that technology equipment, we wouldn't have had the money to do it. So I'm not sure how we would have gone remotely. We would have had to do it without using Chromebooks and laptops and things. So if we had to do that, I guess whatever the teachers and curriculum people could come up with, maybe they would have gone to paper packets or something like that. Yeah, but you know, we don't go over budget. You know, if I have 100 million to spend, that's all I spend. Occasionally something could go over budget that I had no control over, but I'm pretty careful with the budget and make sure that we never go over budget.
Follow up, Alderman Kathy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate that. The reason I asked that was, what I'm trying to understand is, if I look at this budget and I know that I have millions of dollars sitting off to the side coming from the you know, the federal government, any reasonable, logical person would say, can't that offset the budget? And if it can, how can it offset the budget? But what I think I'm hearing is that money is not going to offset the budget. It's going to be spent on things beyond the budget for like renovations and other things that won't necessarily be in this budget. Is that what I'm hearing? Because if we have, you know, somewhere between 12 and $13 million, could that not be used to offset the school budget, you know, not for salaries, but other things that are all these line items that are there, or is that not possible?
It's not possible for many of the things. Any expense, any item you want to spend the ESSER funds on, you have to write up a little explanation of what you want to spend it on, send it up to the state, and they'll respond back on whether that's an allowable cost or not. So if I sent something up and said, I don't want to buy paper anymore, let's say paper costs $200,000, I don't want to buy paper this year, I want the grant to buy the paper, they'd probably say no. That's not a correct use of these funds. These funds are supposed to help you get through COVID. They're supposed to improve conditions, give you more money to spend on students that have many more needs than they used to have. And you can also, since there's so much of it, will allow you to improve your buildings, to therefore improve air quality, keep everyone healthier. But simply to offset some cost in your operating budget, they probably wouldn't allow that. In the beginning, they were pretty strict about that. Right now, I guess it depends on what the item is.
So just to follow up, the two schools where they're looking at renovations are the old open concept, no walls. So if you have an illness in there, it's going to spread like wildfire. So part of the COVID is to segregate those classrooms, segregate those students, upgrade the HVAC system so you get better filtration, better clean air in the rooms, and better overall health of the building. Those are the two schools that are being considered.
Okay.
Follow up?
When do these funds run out? Like, how many years are we gonna continue to get state aid or federal aid through the state in these type of grants? Because I'm thinking, you know, if COVID, in 7 years, if COVID's not here anymore, are we still gonna have funds floating around? Or are we supposed to spend them? Are we planning on spending them? I just figuring out, you know, how long this gravy train of grants is gonna be there.
Very, very good question. The ESSER 1 is all the spending needs to be done by September of this year. ESSER 2 by September of 23, and ESSER 3 by September of 2024. Now, a slight caveat to that, if you have a construction project, a significant renovation project, they may allow you to continue to spend ESSER 3 past the 24th if it just takes longer to get the project done. But for the most part, all those funds need to be spent in those by September of 22, 23, and 24.
So Franklin Street, as an example, is a combination of ESSER funds and bond.
Right, yeah.
The new HVAC system and all of that, making the air cleaner and all that, is all being covered under the federal funds. If we'd had to pay that ourselves, the bond would have been 2 or 3 times what our bond is for
Yeah.
Franklin Street. So we're making out very well there. So did you have one last question?
I have one last one,
And
yeah.
I'm gonna move on?
This is a little bit different of a question. And it's kind of I think it's a softball. Do you feel that you have enough security staff in all the schools? And if not, how much more personnel would you need, in your opinion, for security?
Well, let me just sort of answer part of that, and I'll leave the rest of that to Dr. McKinney. Currently, we have security staff at each high school. We have 3 in each high school and a outside person that goes to both schools. And each high school has a police officer, an SRO it's called, assigned to the schools. We also have another police officer assigned to all the other schools. In the ESSER funding, we do have a request to increase the number of security officers. These are not police officers. These are more like the security officers I mentioned initially at the high schools. So we have a request for, I believe, a total of about 8 more, which would be additional at the high school and additional at the middle schools. And then I'll leave the rest to Dr. McKinney if that's enough.
Dr. McKinney, you had your hand up anyway, so you like chime in?
Yes. In regards to security, while I don't feel completely comfortable talking about it in a public setting, I'm happy to connect offline. Mr. Donovan gave a window into some areas that are being addressed with personnel, and Mr. Smith and Mr. Donovan have a plan in place to address some other upgrades. I know this has been an area of concern. We've addressed some of those things during our Board of Education meetings. We're fortunate to have a strong partnership with the police department, and Chris Lassard does a great job of keeping all the schools honest and keeping us up to date with our security procedures.
Happy to connect offline about that.
Yes,
Thank you.
we probably have some of the most secure schools in New England. And we don't advertise what all the security measures are for that very reason. They're security measures.
Well, I've had to walk
But
into
if
high school.
anybody would like to come and take a tour of the construction at Pennachuck as an example, we'll show you what they are.
Sure.
Okay, I get Alderman Kelly first and then Alderman Tebow.
Thank you. If I could, we're still on ESSER, so I had a quick question around that. So I heard you say that you could actually use the funds for more security officers, which is interesting. I was wondering if we have thought about, or if this is something you are doing with the money around ELL and para, because I assume that your needs for that right now are really high. Always high, probably higher.
Yes, there are a number of positions and ELL coaches that are being supported by the ESTER grant. Just to go back to a previous question, the 4 goals this year for the district were student achievement, social emotional learning, parent and family engagement, and health and safety. And a number of those goals were met thanks in part to funding for ESSER to support some of those needs. For example, you saw additional positions in the budget, additional positions that were supported by ESSER to help our youngest learners. Remember, our K and 1 students weren't in person for 2 years, so we're able to staff the buildings with extra tutors and support personnel for them to get caught up to speed. We also invested in a large contract for SEL, mental health, and some of the student behaviors this year we've seen have been probably some of the most challenging we've seen in a while.
Thank you.
Also, we've heard rumors from the state, I'll let any reps we have speak to that, that the state is looking at adding more funds for local schools for security. What it will cover, we don't know. We have 3 schools that we are looking for security upgrades right now to make them as secure as the others. And also, it looks like they'll be sending funding down for mental health evaluations. And just what that entails, I don't know. Can you add anything, Alderman Bryan?
I know you can't use important words in the evaluation you might need.
Not really, but I would support that. Of course, school security, I'm sure the other members of the national delegation feel the same way.
Okay. I have Alderman Tebow.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wasn't going to say anything at all, but the whole safety thing, I had mentioned it last week in our Alderman meeting, because I had talked to Dr. McKinney and Chief Rourke through email about that, because constituents had asked about the safety of the schools after the recent shootings, and I feel comfortable as well that our schools do everything they can. Now, my question happens to be around if we were to add more police to the schools, or more SROs, whose budget would that come out of? Would that come out of the school budget? Or, because I know there's policemen that go from school to school to school, which aren't SROs, and then we have the high schools that have the SROs. So whose budget would this come out of, education or the police?
To date, all the budgeting for SROs comes out of the police department budget. Correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Donovan?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Alderman Lopez?
With regards to open positions, and I think this might be more of an HR question, there's a lot of openings this year. Is it likely that we'll be able to fill the ones that are required, or are you finding a lot of candidates are applying, or is that going to affect any kind of salary expectations or benefits?
So 2 responses to that. One, we've started the hiring process for next year in mid to late April. And while the pool is not a deep pool, the quality of the applicants in that pool is stronger than it was a year ago. We are filling in a number of the positions. We're starting with obviously our most needed ones first. The second part of that is the ongoing piece with grant management. If you're going to put X amount of dollars in there and you don't fill those positions, then we meet on a regular basis and move that money around and allocate it differently so we can spend down those funds. So while I'm optimistic that we're going to be staffed up in the fall, we have a ways to go through the summer. Because frankly, the school department can't do another year like this without being fully staffed. We're a people business, so we're hoping that we can get those numbers way down.
Other questions for the school department? I had Alderwoman Kelly first and then Alderman Sullivan.
Thank you. It's related to my previous question. I know we gave the paras a bump. How are we in terms of being able to attract? Are we still lower than most school districts, about in the middle? Just looking for a reminder or?
We're currently negotiating with the paras. Their contract that you just recently saw was a 2-year contract, but it covered the previous year and it covered this year. So we're actually negotiating with the paras now. And so I can't answer that until that contract's complete.
Did you want to know where the teachers were relative to the rest of the state?
No,
thought
I
that
was specific about paras. I think
Okay,
that
yeah.
paras especially, I believe,
Woefully underpaid.
woefully underpaid and do incredible work, especially with what's been going on. We need them now more than ever, so just asking if our need is being met. It sounds like you can't really talk about it. I'm hoping that we can, pay them fairly and get some really attractive talent into our city.
I remember years ago, there was a Board of Ed member that couldn't understand why we needed what are now assistant principals. And then he followed one around for a day. He became their biggest advocate from then forward.
Yes.
Alderman Sullivan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is to page 275 around school special revenue funds funded by grants. The final line is $4 million, 25% approximately of the funding estimate. I'm concerned about the language, other unanticipated grant funding. Maybe if it said anticipated or miscellaneous, I would be more comfortable with that. But not knowing, obviously, how the world of grants works, just unanticipated as you're hanging 25% of your budget on money that essentially means you're not anticipating it. Help me understand that.
Mr. Donovan?
So I since I'm home, I don't have that page. What section is that in?
It's page 275. City of Nashua's school special revenue funds funded by grants, fiscal 2023 estimate, final line.
Special revenue funds funded by grants. The only special revenue funds funded by grant would be the food service. So that would be an estimate based on the number of meals sold. So that's a pretty safe estimate because we have a lot of history on how many meals we've sold over the years.
May I?
Yes.
Thank you,
Follow on.
Mr. Chair. Could we connect offline on that to give you a chance to look at it? Because there are several grants listed here. And I would appreciate more clarification on that, but obviously give you a chance to look at it.
All right, and what page did you say again? Just
Page
say it for me,
275.
275.
So the school department shares a grant writer with the city. And she is always applying for grants. And these grants that are coming from the state or federal government for added security of the schools, added mental health experts, all that, that's not in here. That would be in those unanticipated grants and could be even higher than what we have here, depending on what the politicians do, and we never know what the politicians are going to do.
But it could also be significantly lower.
It could,
it's
but I think from a
unanticipated.
basic history, they have some background in the number of grants that they get year to year.
I understand. My unease is in the word unanticipated.
But in these particular, for the pages that you're on, you'll notice that the expenditures always match, the revenues always match the expenditures. So if one goes down, the other goes down.
So what you're saying is,
They're all equal. If you look on every one of those pages through 275, they all balance. They have to.
okay, and I'll go back and tally them all up, but does that 16,482 that includes the 4 million of unanticipated grants in the next fiscal year.
That allows them to accept grants so they can accept the grants. If they weren't in here, they wouldn't be able to accept the grants and be money lost to the city. Same thing with the police department, fire department. They get grants that they can't specifically name right now, but based on history, they get these types of grants. So they have an allowance to be able to accept them.
But if the $4 million doesn't come, or the $4 million is $2 million, or the other way, what happens?
The expenses in that line go down and it's not spent. It's not coming, money's not coming from somewhere else.
So it just goes away.
Right.
Okay.
Any other questions? Alderwoman Kelly.
Thank you. I had a question around electricity. It is actually down about $500,000. I was just wondering why.
Mr. Donovan?
Yes, the reason for that is, we put in, a lot of energy saving equipment at the 2 high schools. And we borrowed money, to put those in, about $6 million. And we are promised that we will save $450,000 each year on our electric bill. And if we don't, then the company that did the work will pay us the difference. So the interesting thing is that work was finished, or mostly finished, about halfway through this year. So we're dealing with sort of a partial year, but next school year, starting July 1st of 22, going forward, we'll have 12 months worth of information. And we will pay the loan amount in August or September, I believe, of $450. And we expect to save that in the electricity line. So what we did in the budget was reduce the electricity line by $450 and added the payment down on the last page of the budget in the operating budget. You'll see a payment of $450 there.
Also, I don't know if Mr. Smith wants to jump in or you want me to cover it on the solar.
I guess I could cover it. Yeah, we've installed solar on 2 schools, Fairgrounds Middle School and Dr. Crisp. Both systems have been in place for about a year, actually about a year and a half. Kind of discounted the first half year just because of COVID. Had to wait till we had a full group of students and staff in the schools to really start to measure. Had to go back to 2019, which was last time we had a full set of students and staff. And just finished analysis about a month ago, and we're definitely saving money in both cases. So that's going to help us with electrical costs as well.
And we'll be putting solar in as soon as the project is done to Pennachuck. We'll be putting solar in there, and there'll be solar on top of the new school, which will be significant savings on electricity going downstream.
If I could follow up.
Alderwoman Kelly?
Thank you. So I think you said that the energy efficient projects, which I'm very excited about, were the high schools. Have we done it at any of the elementary schools? Or are we waiting to see how this goes and then kind of figure out a plan to roll it out to the other schools?
Mr. Smith, who wants to grab that one?
That is a good question.
So this was something, the whole concept is called energy performance contracting. We brought it to the Board of Ed maybe 3 years ago. And because it was new to everybody, the Board of Ed at that time chose, well, let's just try this out first and see how it works. And they chose to do it at the high schools. I think now that they've seen it does work and it does save money, they will possibly look at doing it, expanding it in the future. We're kind of using the same concepts, using the same company, in fact, at Franklin Street. So that's going to be very energy efficient when the time comes. We've seen the practices they've been using. So as we've gone through the middle school project, we're using kind of the same concepts. We're replacing transformers, we're replacing, going to LED lighting, that sort of things. So I think our energy program in the city or the school district's at least 20 years old now, and we just continue to add different bells and whistles to our what we do. and solar is just the most recent thing.
Thanks for the update and the hard work on it.
Yeah. Alderman Jettie, did you have a question? No?
Yeah, thank you. I read the same article that Alderman Sullivan did. And, you know, it's a newspaper article, so it's,
Suspect.
you know, what it all really means is questionable, but I'm sure, you know, constituents other than Alderman Sullivan and me have read this article as well and may have questions related to this, you know, at the hearing. So, I would ask if Mr. Donovan could look at the article. It's in the Sunday's Union Leader. It's in the City Hall column by Paul Feely. And it, you know, it's not, I'm looking at it now, it's not clear, you know, this money, you know, it says that they reduced the mayor's proposed budget for education in Manchester by $2 million. And it refers to you know, it talks about, you know, federal money and, you know, this HB 420 as the source of funding, which enables them to reduce the budget. But there are a lot of other things. I won't read the whole article to you, but there are a lot of other things it refers to and raises questions in my mind. So it's really not clear to me, you know, whether this, you know, whether we could, you know, make similar cuts or not. I'm sure when you read the article, you'll know why we raised the issue, and, you know, perhaps you could be better prepared to answer, you know, questions, especially from the constituents who may come to the hearing.
Okay. And also in
Okay, I'll read the article and let people know my thoughts.
Also in today's paper, you notice that where they negotiate and have their fireman's contract is much different than ours. I don't know if you read the article today, but they're having a battle over that right now on people getting paid for being available if there's a big fire and things like that. So it's just, but it's different than our contract. So cities do things different ways. So I'm sure you can look into it. Alderman O'Brien?
Thank you. You're right about the fireman's contract, even though it's fireman is the only germane word. When you're working for municipalities, it's apples and oranges. Different municipalities have different criteria. But Mr. Chairman, my question is to Mr. Smith. And although to be commended with the, you know, the solar, I'd like to take a step back. Concerned because I worked a lot with the, you know, getting the hydroelectric dams and everything, and we're limited by net metering. So no matter how many solar panels we could throw up there, we can only put so many to receive any type of benefit. Are we even close to that, or does that pertain collectively, you know, as a municipality, or just to the school department? And could that affect your process in the future?
What I've seen in my analysis so far is we consume about 50% of what we produce. So the 50% that we don't produce goes back into the network, and the utility gets to use it. We don't benefit from it. We benefit in some cases, we get a little bit of break on what they charge back. So when the sun goes down, we're not producing, we have to buy our electricity from Eversource. We get a bit of a break on that cost. But if the technology ever reaches the point where we could store our own energy, in other words, get batteries that just store that 50%, then use it overnight, that'd be the best way to go. And I think other states like Massachusetts have that capability now. And I think it's a legislative process that has to get us there. Hopefully that answered your question.
No, you did, because it's also with the the provider. You know, they're in the business to sell electricity. So when you're going in with the solar, you're taking away their profitability.
Yes.
So the end result is the net metering. You can only use up to a certain percentage, and that's what the trouble is.
But I believe that they just increased the amount of, that you could use. The net metering jumped, Doria Brown just brought that up at one of our latest meetings. So we are getting more use out of the electricity we generate now than we did. Not that we're getting the maximum amount, but as Mr. Smith had said, it was a significant savings at fairgrounds, even though we had construction going on, you know, and now we have a year without, you know, people with saws and drills and everything else going all the time. I'm sure the savings will be even more. Alderwoman Kelly?
I saved my hardest question for last. I wanted to ask about out-of-district tuition. I know it's been a topic that we've talked about at budget, you know, year over year, but I see that it's about the same as it's been. Have we talked about ways to get that number down? It's about 6 million.
Mr. Donovan?
Yes, budget has a $100,000 increase in it versus this past school year. Interestingly enough, for the first time since I have been here, this school year, we will stay under budget in the out-of-district tuition, which is sort of amazing. But because the costs of these schools where we send our students has, in some cases, skyrocketed, but everywhere it has increased. But the thing that happened this year was we had fewer students that were out of district. During the last 3 years, we had a number of students who were either in residential placements or in expensive situations that reached the age of maturity. They reached 21. Once you reach 21, the school district no longer pays for your education or your care at these schools. So a number of those students over the last couple of years reached that age, moved on, which then reduced our total cost. And this school year, part of it, I think, is the special educators did a better job of keeping the kids in the school. I mean, that should be our goal all the time, to keep the kids within the district and give them the services they need within the district. Sometimes that's not possible, thus the reason for out of district. But the number, we have been running for the last 5 or 6 years between 90 and 100, and this year we're down to about 68. Now, next year is going to be very interesting. Is that number going to go back up? Because did COVID prevent students from going out because they weren't in the schools? They were learning remotely? I don't know. But it's, this year, like I said, for the first time since I've been here, it's below budget. It's been running, you know, there's been years when it's been 800,000 over budget. And this year it's going to be about 300,000 under budget.
And it's federally mandated and we have no control over it, correct?
Well, true. The only control we have is can we service the needs of the students internally without sending them out? That's a discussion taking place at a very individual level with the parents and the student and the special educators.
And I believe that one new wing on the new middle school will help to some degree.
That is the hope, yes.
I thought that was your last question, Alderman Kelly.
I have a follow-up, please.
Go ahead.
I actually was hoping you would talk a little bit about the new wing. And then my follow-up to Mr. Donovan is same kind of idea of like, how can we continue to help support you? Do you have the resources you need to continue to keep the kids in district when it is appropriate for their individual needs?
Well, I think that's a question better answered by either Dr. McKinney or a special education director, Marcia Bagley. We have a lot of resources. We do the best we can, but the needs of the students are so varied. I think it's kind of hard for me to answer that. I don't know if Garth wants to kick in.
Dr. McGinney?
I certainly think the special education administrative team works really hard to meet the needs of all kids. One of the challenges in Nashua is we do a pretty solid job with special education students. And when a new family moves in, there's my cat, yeah. That can throw off our best laid plans that are made over the summer because new families can move in and have substantial needs and costs that need to be met. We've made some creative moves where we've had the opportunity to reallocate personnel, say a classroom teacher position, moving it over to a special education position and opening a classroom for kids there. But moving forward, the two areas of challenge in special education is certainly staffing. It's a demanding position for educators to go into, and then two, space, finding additional space for programs for the diverse needs of our kids, because there's certainly a caseload or a cap of the number of kids that a teacher could take in a classroom, sometimes in the area of 10 to 12 with a number of paraeducators in the classroom.
Understood.
Thank you. All set?
Could you answer my second question about the new wing?
What?
Just for everyone listening, what's included in the new wing that will help support
I don't
special
know if you've
education?
finalized everything that's gonna be in the new wing, but you have some ideas at the new middle school?
We haven't finalized all of those ideas. Some of them include alternative spaces, both for general ed and special education students, some proactive collaboration spaces, but we're still having conversations around that. One of the unfortunate byproducts of this year of not having teachers participate in all our committees is, that's something that we're gonna take back to those groups and gather their feedback.
I believe also the concept was to try and bring students in from other districts and charge them tuition. Any other questions? No other questions?
Mr. Chairman, I have one.
Oh, I'm
Line.
sorry.
That's
Alderman
okay.
Tebow.
Thank you, Mr. President, or Mr. Chairman. So I'm sure you guys have seen this, that we probably every year anticipate that the rates of electricity are gonna change, and I'm glad we're doing a lot with the energy efficiency stuff, but from what I've seen, the electricity rates are gonna go way up, and I saw that the executive council actually all wrote letters on it, and I'm wondering if that's anticipated in not only this budget, obviously all of our budgets, that the increase that we're gonna see on electricity doesn't seem like a normal increase. Seems like it's going to be very high come July.
Mr. Smith, don't we go out to other sources and get electricity, or is that Doria Brown's?
Mr. Smith, you can answer that.
Both Doria for behalf of the rest of the city, and then we, for the school districts, have locked in electrical rates, in our case, for the next 3 years. I'm not sure where she stands with how many years she's got locked in. So we have very favorable rates, so we, at least on the consumption piece, we shouldn't be affected. I haven't looked at the potential increases to see if that also is for delivery. So we may be affected by it somewhat.
Yeah.
Thank
Any
you.
other questions? Seeing none, thank you very much all for coming in. We appreciate going through the budget with you, and tomorrow night is the public hearing, so see everybody there. Okay. Alderman O'Brien.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to make the motion to recommend tabling -22-035, which is relative to the adoption of the fiscal year 2023 proposed budget by the City of Nashua, general enterprise, special revenue, and grant funds.
Motion is to table R 22-035. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. I would open it up to public comment, but there's no one online and no one in the chamber, so I don't think we need public comment. General discussion? Alderman Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to revisit the pension situation because tomorrow night is the public hearing, and I think we're gonna get asked about it a lot. Because it was such a major issue in the fiscal year 22 budget, the amount that we had to pay back. Obviously, the governor has signed the bill. There must be some type of guidance, even if the number is in pencil, of what the state is going to either cover or cut us a check for or something. There must be something, because it would be, if we know that we're getting money from the state, why would we include that in our budget if we know we're getting money for it? We did it last year when we had to include it because we knew what we had to pay that the state wasn't going to cover. So now we're just going to reverse it. How is it that we knew the number last year, but we don't know the number this year?
Mr. O'Brien?
Yeah. Alderman Sullivan, welcome to my world. There was a lot of games played. Partisanship games. The original bill that I helped construct would have been in perpetuality. We're talking for the city of Nashua $2 million, but folks at home, we're talking total for the city of Nashua. Liabilities for 11 years of $8 million, taken away by one political party. The state, in order to get everybody into the New Hampshire retirement system, in 1967 promised cities and towns that they would pay 35% of the pension cost. In 2011, the state of New Hampshire, with one party, reneged on that promise. For 11 years, municipalities have been paying that 35%. For Nashua this year, I think the numbers were roughly around 8 million. The bill I constructed was only to pay 1/4. 1/4. $2 million. And they couldn't even give us that, folks. They did not give us that. So what they did is they took the bill, and what they did is mirage it with an omnibus bill that had nothing to do. I think we're in with street cleanings for the state and other different things, and garages and other, Marge Podge of what the state does. And they said one time, and one time only, that rollback would come back to the state. How can you budget, Alderman Sullivan? When you do a budget, what does a budget mean? You plan out for the future. But to have a one-time, I call that like a windfall. So we don't really know. This is the first time it's ever happened. My communication with probably directly too, and I'll work with you on this because I don't completely understand it. I don't think the state's going to give us a check of roughly about $2 million, which is about what our guesstimation of what it's going to be. But what they'll probably say is within that budgeting for the state pension system, you won't have to pay the $2 million. Okay, and that may not occur at the lifetime of this, within this budget. I don't know. It probably will occur within this year, but I won't say it may not be enacted. I don't know how many days after passage, because this was, like I say, a very quick and easy bill written by Senator Bradley, the good gentleman from Wolfboro. So we don't know. Evidently Wolfboro doesn't have the same issues that we in Nashua have. It's kind of unique. But anyways, it's anybody's, you're right. But I think Mr. Griffin will probably have a better handle on it once he gets to digest exactly what the governor and signing of this. I would have preferred that they did my bill, not because it was my bill, I'm working on it, but we could have very easily planned a budget, truly a budget, for the next several years. And that would have been it.
You know, I was amazed at, you know, going, especially this budget, and really all the budgets, because I really had no idea how much money we get from the state, and I have nothing to base it on. I have no historical data or whatever. But when Mr. Donovan pointed out the state aid that we got, that's a big jump. I mean, we got $8 million more in fiscal year '22 from that specific state aid fund than we had anticipated. And then it'll be 9 million over what was budgeted from last year. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of money.
That's the revenue side.
Right.
Expenses also went up. And that's what that revenue was to cover.
Right, but we talk about the state doesn't, the state doesn't, the state doesn't. Again, I have no historical facts to back this up. I can only see year over year. Include in that 8 million plus another 6 million from rooms and meals tax that came back to Nashua. I mean, that's a lot of money.
Yes.
And then, you know, wherever this omnibus bill shakes out, I'll be curious to see, but there is some money flowing from Concord. The only reason I press on that is because I think we're going to get asked on it. It was in the newspaper. Thank you for mentioning it. And it was, I think that people are going to ask, and they're probably going to push hard for what that number is. And that's the only reason I'm pushing on it.
Just to reiterate tomorrow night's public hearing, the aldermen are there to listen. They don't get involved in answering questions or answers. The public, it's their opportunity. They ask questions. If they ask questions about this, then either the mayor or Mr. Griffin will be answering them. If they don't have a distinct answer there, I'm sure they will, hopefully by the wrap-up session the following night. If not, at some point, it would be factored into the tax rate. It's not like, you know, they're gonna put it in a drawer someplace. So how it gets, we have to find out how it's coming from the state, how we apply it to the budget, and a lot of times that happens after we've set the budget. We set the spending part of the budget, but the revenue side fluctuates. So, and Mr. Griffin, or you can either call him and talk to him about it individually, or I'm sure by the wrap-up session he'll be here and can answer questions. Hang on a second. Also, when we have the wrap-up session, if you want to subtract something from the budget, you have to indicate the page, the department, the line item, where it's coming from. If you want to balance it with something else, take money from A and put it over at B, you need both sets of numbers so that we can allocate it. In the end, if we increase the mayor's budget, it takes 10 votes. If we either keep the mayor's budget number or decrease, it's only 8 votes. And that will be on the 28th, hopefully, if we get the budget wrapped up in the budget committee. Yes, Alderman Jettie?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, that brings up a question I have. None of us likes to be surprised, at these wrap-up sessions, if somebody, suggests that, or makes a motion to, add something to the budget or remove something from the budget, and it comes out of the blue. I don't know about the rest of you, but it's oftentimes, difficult for me to really, evaluate, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. And I'm wondering, without violating the 91A, the right to know rules about, not talking to a quorum, outside a public meeting, is there some way that, people who anticipate making a motion, that they could submit that in advance so that we would have some time to do our homework on it and,
I believe Corporation Counsel will tell you no, but you can ask them. But I've been doing this for 11 years and that never happens because then you violate the right to know law. Typically on the wrap-up session, we have a few motions that are made, not a ton, and you have to draw a conclusion as to whether you're in favor of doing it or not in favor of doing it. I'm sure there are a few motions that will come up, but we can't do it ahead, no. And we also are bouncing up against the July 1st. Now, granted, we could go beyond July 1st without a budget, but now you have to get it done by at least August 1st, I think. And you have all of the divisions operating on the same levels they're operating on now. It's like a continuing budget. But at least in the last number of years I've been involved, we've had it wrapped up before the end of June. So 1st of July, when the new fiscal year starts, we have a new budget. Alderman O'Brien?
Thank you. I just want to take a step back, and please excuse me, I don't mean to be on a diatribe with the state, but I am at war with the state. Just to finish up, and so you know, just as a matter of education, we have a potential candidate for executive council in our midst. But 35% of the state of New Hampshire economy is generated, bingo, right here between Manchester and Nashua. Yet we can't get commuter rail. We can't get anything. We even had somebody, a state senator from a Nashua district, go up and let the people of Hart's location up on the Canadian border, people of Vermont that live in New Hampshire, to tell us all about spending caps. How does that work? But they did it, and I think that affects the sovereignty of the city. But you're taking the example of Keno, which benefits education in this particular state. But Nashua sells Keno. But does every community sell Keno? But they made sure when they wrote that state law, for those communities that don't sell Keno, they go up at the bucket and they expect the state to fill it. Is that fair? No. A lot of things got to change up at Concord. I mean, we contribute. I don't know how many millions of dollars in lottery tickets and Keno, which is earmarked for education, goes somewhere else and doesn't benefit Nashua education. These are things that need to be fixed by the state, and we should watch that. And I'll let that, and this is the passion one. Hey, 16 years I banged my head against the State House wall. I'll do it for another 2 years. Geez, if $100 a year, that's what you get for being a state rep, I could just imagine not getting elected again. I'll have to get a paper route. But anyways, we'll try it again.
All right, anyone else? Alderwoman Kelly?
Maybe I just misunderstood the schedule, but in the previous years, we've had wrap up and then we've had wrap up if needed. I didn't see any of that. If we were to go to a second night, have you thought about that?
No, we do have a second night schedule.
When is it? It's just not on my calendar, so I didn't see it.
I think it's 2 days
June
later.
27th.
27th,
Is that Monday?
yeah.
Okay. I'm just gonna hold my calendar.
At least in the last number of years I remember, we've never got to that second because there aren't that many motions you can make that are logical.
Oh, I don't wanna have to use it. I just wanted to know when it was potentially if we needed to.
Yeah. So to get something out of budget, you just need a majority of budget,
Cool.
one way or the other.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right. I guess we were also covered remarks by Alderman.
I would say so, I did.
Nobody has any?
And I apologize, thank you for
noticed.
listening.
Alderman O'Brien,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to make the motion to adjourn.
motion is to adjourn. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. We're adjourned at 8:24 PM. Thank you, everyone.